What's good, YouTube? This is Boxingwave, and we are back with another fight breakdown. Before I get started, please subscribe to the channel. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. And if you are a supporter of the channel, please hit the thumbs up for me, all right? Do me that favor. Okay, the big fight is this weekend. Saul Alvarez against Terence Crawford. This is going to be for Undisputed at 168, and it's going to be on Netflix, okay? I will be here to cover the fight live, so make sure you're here this Saturday. We're going to have a great time, all right? Look, this is not planned. You guys know, if you've been watching the content, I was supposed to be breaking up and doing videos on this specific fight. I'm just going to give you the breakdown the way I normally do. I just don't have, with time management and still having to work and covering other fights. I just dropped the Lester Martinez, Christian Mbili video. That breakdown, that's going to be on the undercard of this card. So please check out that video. Also, I just dropped the Naoya Inoue against MJ Akhmadaliev breakdown as well. Check that video out. I'm just going to give it all here. All right. And I'm going to do it in the same way. I'm going to be as fair as I can. I know there's a lot of emotions going into this fight, man. There's a lot of tribalism. There's a lot of hatred. You know what I mean? There's a lot of fanboyism going into this, but I'm going to be as fair as I can possibly be for this fight here. All right. So where do we begin? Okay. Again, this fight is for Undisputed at 168. Crawford is moving up from two weight divisions, moving up from 154, where he fought last year against Israel Madrimov, and one fight where he picked up a title there, and he's moving up to fight Canelo Alvarez, who's been campaigning at this division for some time now. He's had a lot of fights there. He's had a lot of title defenses there, and he's even fought above the division at 175 before. All right, so we're going to cover as much as we can here in this breakdown. As far as the odds, as far as the betting odds, it's damn near even. Canelo is a slight favorite, even though Bud is moving up two divisions, but it's pretty much damn easy. So you're gonna make some money. You know, either way you're going with this. If you got Bud winning, if you got Canelo winning, you're gonna make a little bit of money because Canelo, who's normally a heavy favorite going into fights, even Crawford, normally a heavy favorite going into fights, it's not the case for this fight here. Okay. All right. Where do we begin with this? All right. Well, what makes this fight really difficult to call is because there's a lot of unknowns, right? Because Crawford is the one that's moving up. And usually, as far as history, guys that move up multiple divisions, they don't do well in these kind of fights. When you're moving up this much in one fight, especially because Crawford only had one fight at 154. It's a lot. Canelo has been fighting bigger guys, and I've made video detailing that. And I'll talk a little bit about weight here, but I'm not going to primarily talk about that because I've done content on that already, breaking that down. But I will touch up on it here. But there's a lot of unknowns here, and I'm going to tell you some of the unknowns here. One of the unknowns is weight, and that's obvious. Not because of Canelo being bigger, but because Crawford never fought this high up, and he's putting on a lot of weight, or not putting on, but he's fighting at a higher weight than he normally fights. So I understand that he may walk around above 168, but the fight at 168 is a totally different thing. Not only that, but Canelo is normally used to fighting much bigger guys. So everything that we're comparing, when we're comparing resumes and we're comparing opponents, like I've said in previous video, the talent gap in the most recent fights with Canelo, they're not really that great, but he's still fighting much bigger guys. He's getting hit by much heavier guys. So when we say he's never been dropped and he's rarely gotten hurt in his career, right? Only a couple times where he caught a good shot. He's been fighting bigger guys for a longer time. He's used to absorbing punches from them. Even the fights that he that was very competitive and close, he absorbed those punches from the bigger guys, and some of those guys were KO artists. Whereas Crawford, yes, he boxes well. Yes, he has an excellent chin too. He's never been down either. but he's been fighting smaller guys. And even though he's been hurt by a couple of them, like Gambo and what's the guy, Velasquez caught him with a good shot. These are smaller guys. We're talking about guys that was down at 135, guys that's at 147. Is a difference, you know what I mean? And even those two are not on Canelo's level. So there's a lot of unknowns with that. I think they're both. I think when I listen to people, I think a lot of people have their emotions when they're giving their picks. A lot of people don't really like Canelo like that. A lot of people don't like the tainted meat and failed drug test. A lot of people don't like the decisions and some of the judges being on his side in very close fights. You know what I mean? A lot of people don't like him for those reasons. Some people think he's overrated. Some people didn't like his last performance, which is another thing I got to touch on in a moment. All right. People don't like him like that. And then you got Crawford, that people think he's overrated too, because they think that he fought certain people at the right time. They're not looking at the stylistic matchup. They're looking at the resume and when he fought them and not them not being at their best and stuff like that. They're looking at all of those kind of things, and they're not really looking at the details of what's happening in the ring. You know what I mean? They're not looking at that. They're looking at timing and opponents and stuff like that. And the fact that a lot of people are looking at this like a skill versus size thing, which is also not true. Both of them got skills. Both of them are really talented. I've said this in the last 7 months, because I think the first video I've done on this fight here was 7 months ago. And I said the same thing continuously since I started talking about this fight. And I said, if there is a skill set difference, and I do give it to Crawford and a very narrow, debatable, type of thing. I think the gap is really thin. If there's a difference between the two, and I don't think Crawford is way better than Canelo. I just think that, I think he's a little bit more versatile. I think he has a little bit more tools and stuff, his movement and stuff. I think, but they both are really good. Like, they are elite at the very top tier of the people that's all in the game. They're great at what they do from a technical ability. You know what I mean? Like, so when people say that, I don't think it's that. I just think that one fighter narrowly is maybe a little better, but it's debatable. And then one guy is clearly, I don't think even Canelo is that much bigger than Canelo. I don't think Canelo is that much bigger than Crawford. I think that Canelo is just used to fighting bigger guys, So we have all of that. And again, Crawford, at the end of the day, he's the one that put this out there. You guys know what I mean. He's the one that's done interviews after being Errol Spence where he said there are weight classes for a reason, okay? He said that in interviews. He's on TV saying that. There's videos of him saying that himself. Before the William Skull fight, before the Edgar Berlanga fight, before his fight with Israel Madrimov, right? Crawford is the one that said this. When he was still at 147, he said this, okay? When he beat Errol Spence, he went on the Breakfast Club here in New York and spoke to Charlemagne the God, and he asked him, hey, what about Canelo? Would you fight Canelo? He said, yeah, maybe at a catch weight of 158. He said that. That's not something I'm making up. This is something he said out of his own mouth. So you got to understand, you got to put all of these things into account, because Crawford said that. So it doesn't matter that Canelo's performance against Skull wasn't that great. It doesn't matter that people like Shakur Stevenson or Bill Haney, is telling Crawford that he can beat. It doesn't matter what these people say. At the end of the day, Crawford at one point even thought the idea of fighting Canelo was a little bit ridiculous. Now the money's there, and I understand he should take it. Why? Because he still feels like he has something to prove, and that can be a strength for him. Feeling like you have something to prove is going to give you more motivation, because even beating Spence, people are already saying, Spence wasn't the same guy. He was caught up in an accident. He wasn't the same fighter when he fought him. Neither was Kell Brook. Neither was Sean Porter. I got to hear this all the time. So at the end of the day, you still feel like you have to prove something going into another fight. and which is exactly why, you know, this fight is being made, because he does have something to prove. He does care about legacy. I'm sure he cares about all that money he's getting. I mean, at the end of the day, it's prize fighting, but he feels like he has something to prove still moving forward. All right. And another thing too, and I'm gonna get into the technicals and all that, but another thing is too, what makes this hard to call is that they're both recent fights, really doesn't tell the full story. You know, when we talk about resumes, I know people are gonna always bring it up, and I said this in a video, like, yeah, when you look at Alvarez's his resume, from beating Mosley and beating Cotto and Trout and Lara and Triple G, and and then even the losses, like Floyd and Bivol, the fact that he fought those guys, beating Kovalev, beating Saunders and Plant when they were undefeated, Callum Smith, that's a hell of a resume. It was a hell of a resume, but you know when we break down these fights, Canelo is 35 years old. He got nearly 70 fights in. He's been fighting for 20 years as a pro. Crawford too. He's going to be 38 in a couple weeks. All right, not as many pro fights, but he's 38 years old. He's four. He's four. This is his fifth division, and he skipped one. This is his fifth division. You know, two divisions, that's a lot. It's a lot, and he's moving up. So when we look at these recent fights, it makes it more difficult to call because Canelo had a fight with William Skull, and it was probably the worst fight I've seen all year because Skull did a lot of movement, very little engagement with him. Okay. A lot of moving this way, a lot of moving that way, this moving, this, throw a punch here, move a little bit more. 30 seconds going by with no punches thrown between the two. Canelo's fighting like, all right, let's get this over with. You already gave me my money. I already have the 4-fight deal. I know I'm fighting Crawford next. I'm not chasing this guy. I'm not doing any of that. The fight is already set up. The next fight is set up. He looks like he's so disinterested in fighting. I'm not cutting off the ring. I'm not doing anything. That's what Canelo looked like. So when you watch that fight and coming off of that fight, and when Crawford goes into the ring and does the face-off with Canelo, I'm thinking, man, Crawford can beat this guy. Based on this performance of this version of Canelo, he's going to beat this guy. That's what everybody said. You think the odds are based off Canelo's performance against Berlanga and Munguia? No, it's based on the Skull fight, which he looked horrible in because he didn't even attempt to, he barely did enough to win the fight. And the same with Crawford, he goes to 154. He's fighting the biggest guy he's faced. Okay. And he doesn't stop him, and he's also struggling a little bit because this guy, Madrimov, is doing 1,000 feints in the fight in each round. All he's doing is feinting. He's doing very few punches of feinting. And Crawford can't get the timing down. He has to continuously reset himself because this guy was so jerky. And we haven't seen Crawford in there with anybody like that. Not only that, but Crawford was moving up for that fight. So it was a dangerous fight. I think he showed Madrimov a little bit too much respect, but it's not a good fight to really call based on the styles because Canelo doesn't fight like Israel Madrimov. And Crawford doesn't fight like William Skull. There's not things in these fights that's really telling me like, hey, this is the fight's gonna go this way based on this guy and stuff. Like, I mean, all this Skull did was show me that he could move really well. I mean, he has some good timing, but he's not no Crawford. And Madrimov, who I think is a really good fighter, but he's doing things is more feinting and, feinting. That's all I can really say. Yes, he has some good right hands that landed against Bud, but the setup was much different from the way Canelo do things. Canelo doesn't do things like that, So when we look at the recent fights, it's very hard to call based off those performances because I don't think neither one of those fights were like stylistically. There's very few similarities there, and overall, it's just the styles just doesn't really mesh well. I think there's other fights that we could go to and look at, and I'll talk about that shortly. But those are the things there. Now, as far as weight, Crawford moving up to 168. I mean, he looks great. He looks in phenomenal condition, but he is 38 years old. He's moving up with age, and being that he's fighting a technical pressure fighter like Canelo, how much moving can he do and and having to deal with a pressure fighter that hits very hard, that's knocked out guys that's much bigger than him. How long can he do that at the highest level? You know what I mean? Uh, these are the things that you got to look at, and stamina. How good is his cardio going to be? His cardio's always been good. But if you notice, if you look from his fights at 135 to 140, right? And compare those fights from those two divisions to his fights at 147, yes, he's still got great speed and he moves extremely well. But you're moving up. It's gonna look like the fight is in slow motion. You might still be quicker than the guys at 47 or the guy at 54 or even Canelo in the fight. He still might have a slight hand speed advantage, but he's gonna be slower than what we normally used to see him at. You're not gonna move up in weight and be quicker. You know what I mean? He looks slower as he's moving up now, and because he's aging, you know. So you got to look at those things as well. You got to look at all of those things. With Canelo, I know what we're getting. This is not a catch weight fight. There's no rehydration clause. There's none of that here. It's a guy that's fighting where he's used to fighting at versus a guy that's testing it all out against the highest level, not just the highest level at 168, but the highest level of way better than anybody he's fought. And not only that, but Canelo, I would say that he's not at his absolute prime, but I would say he's probably 80% of what he is at his very best. I would say Crawford's probably around the same too. You know what I mean? He's probably like 80% of what he's actually at his best, and I'm comparing his best to Jeff Horn and Victor Postal, like those guys, you know what I mean? Like I'm thinking of those guys where he was lighter and quicker, you know what I mean? And just he's older. He's 38 years old. He's still very good. But to get your hardest shot at 38 against a guy that you had to move two up divisions up to fight, that's undisputed. That's pound for pound, and that's already a Hall of Famer too. It's kind of tough. Yeah, but you know what? Let's talk about some of the strengths. I know I've just spent about almost 20 minutes already just talking about, the fight overall, right? Before I bring up Crawford and some of his strengths, I was going to wait until after the weigh-in, all right? The plan was to put these videos out. I was going to do separate videos talking about strengths and weaknesses. I just don't have the time for it. But my final prediction video was going to be after the weigh-in. I wanted to at least see what they both look like. I think it's very important for Crawford to come in. I don't think he should come in at 168. I think he should be a little less. I don't think him putting too much weight is going to really be beneficial to him because he's going to still be smaller than what Canelo is used to facing, So if he makes the 168, even though he's in phenomenal shape, I've seen his abs and stuff. People was trying to take this old picture of this MMA fighter that he took from earlier this year. I knew that the picture was off because the picture, his braids were different in the picture. So I knew that wasn't a new picture, but he's in phenomenal shape. I think Crawford should be coming in at the lower 60s or maybe around 160. I think speed needs to be a key for him. I just think being heavier, you're going to still be smaller, and even though that extra weight might make you absorb Canelo's punches a little better, it's gonna slow you down a little bit. You know what I mean? I think this it's just you don't want to. It's two division jump. So in my personal opinion, I think coming in maybe around 162 will just show exactly what you're working on doing. All right. But some of the advantages of Crawford and moving up two divisions, what I will say is, outside of all the historical fights with like, Sugar Ray Robb and, guys like Sugar Ray Leonard and all the fighters that's jumped up divisions and stuff like Roy Jones did going up to heavyweight. There's been a lot of fights, but I know in recent years and when I was at an age where, at a time where I was actually doing content, we had jumps, two division jumps, fights that I was able to actually cover and do breakdowns. And I knew everything that was going on leading up to these fights. And I've never been a fan of the two-weight jump. All right. I didn't like it when Mikey did it. I didn't like what Kell Brook did it. I didn't like it when any of these guys did it. But what I will say is that I think that Crawford has a better shot than all of those guys. All right. I think it's a little bit more warranted for Crawford than it is for those guys that did it. Those guys that did it didn't really prove that they were the best. And I know Crawford was just visiting at 154. I know at 47 he proved that he was the best by beating Spence, but 54 there was like just only one fight, and there's still a lot of fighters there. Now I've always said I wanted him to beat all of those guys and become undisputed there, but we're not going to get that. So, and I understand he's not going to make the money down there. But what I'll say is that I like his chances of beating Canelo more so than Mikey beating Errol or Rigondeaux beating Loma. You know what I mean? Or Kell Brook beating Triple G. Those fights just did not make sense to me at all. Whereas this fight, because Crawford and his abilities, and when talking about his abilities, the versatility, him being able to switch, him being a physically strong fighter. One thing that I said about the Errol Spence fight going into this fight is that he's physically stronger than Errol. I think he is. I thought he was. I know people used to talk about the size all the time in that fight. Crawford is a physically strong fighter, and he has a wrestling background. When I seen him deadlifting a certain amount of weight for his sides, I knew right there that this guy's a physically strong guy. And not only that, but Crawford, like Canelo, because I got to give Canelo his props too. But when it comes to those veteran tricks, that the elites do, especially on the inside, being able to tie up and frame and use those forearms and pushing off your opponents, you know what I mean? And locking them up when you need to. Crawford is one of those guys that he's smaller, but he's physically strong. Now he's fighting Canelo, who's physically strong too, So I don't know how that's going to go. But I would say that out of all of the literal guys jumping up, Crawford is physically strong and he's been durable up to this point. All right. He's been a durable fighter. He's a guy that stays fit. He's always in the gym. He's always had good stamina, but the abilities he have on the inside to control and nullify his opponents on the inside, even the guys that were very physical, like Errol, like Porter. Porter's always been physically strong. Jeff Horn, to be able to manhandle those guys that at the time were bigger than Crawford, just shows that there's something there that is going to be beneficial towards him moving up two divisions. All right. The thing is, Canelo's always been good at those things too. You know what I mean? Using those forearms and having head control. You know what I mean? Those are the things that Canelo has always flourished too in fighting bigger guys and even fighting guys or anybody he's fought. Canelo has those tactics to frustrate his opponents on the inside. And a lot of these guys were bigger, but he was able to control them and neutralize their offense, especially when Canelo's never had the greatest stamina. You know what I mean? So he's been able to do the same as well. But even with the poor stamina, he was still able to control and not let these guys just have their way with him. Obviously, Crawford has the height and reach advantage, and that's going to be a key. Because even though a lot of people had a height and reach advantage going into a Canelo fight, Crawford can do some of the things we've seen him do in the Bivol fight with Canelo. Canelo's fight with Bivol, it was all about the lead hand, and just probing, changing the speed of that lead hand, using it as a wand, you know what I mean? Changing the speed, turning it into a hard jab at times, but just probing and touching, you know what I mean? Touching that high guard of Canelo. And that's what something that Crawford can do. He can do that. Now he doesn't have Bivol's size. And I don't think Crawford is nearly as defensively responsible as Dimitri Bivol. Bivol is a defensive fighter, even though he throws a good amount of punches. Okay. And he has great accuracy. But he's defensive too. You know what I mean? There's periods where he won't throw anything. Sometimes he's just waiting and posturing because he wants to counter. So Bivol is a guy that is, and he probably has the best high guard in the game. He has an active high guard because he's doing everything with his hands. He's not just sitting there like this. He's parrying with it. You know what I mean? He's measuring it. He's not just keeping his hands up and staying stiff. And he moves as well. Crawford can do those things, but Crawford is smaller, and would Crawford be able to push Canelo like the way Bivol did, like the way Crawford did against Errol Spence? Will he be able to do that to Canelo? Because Canelo is a guy that does it. You know what I mean? Canelo is a guy that pushes off his opponents. So when I seen Bud do it to Spence, I was like, see, I knew it. I knew he was stronger. I knew he was stronger. I knew he would be able to just outbox Spence and bully him at times and walk him down. That was predictable. Canelo's on a different level. Canelo does those things against bigger guys. So I don't know if Bud would be able to do those kind of things. So when Bivol was doing it, it's because Bivol was naturally a bigger man. He's been a career light heavy. You know what I mean? Bud, as strong as he is, I know he's a wrestler. I know he feels he can beat the world. But Canelo's a bigger dude. So I don't know, even though these are the things that are an advantage for Bud, his strength, his speed, his IQ, his durability. This is the first time he's fighting someone that either can match some of those things or even be better. You know what I mean? Especially because you got to put the size factor in there. You know what I mean? So it's very different. Let's talk about the switching. Have people bring up the switching. I listen to all of these. Shout out to all the legends that just give their thoughts on this fight, right? Everybody brings up the switching as if we don't know which hand and stance is the dominant stance for Crawford. Okay? It's clear to me, and it's been clear for me for years now, that Crawford is a southpaw fighter. He can fight well as, a righty and everything. He does it well. But depending on who he's facing, yes, he could go long periods of time in certain rounds fighting as an orthodox stance. He could. But at the end of the day, he's a southpaw. And when I look at fights like David Avenesian, or even fights where he comes out fighting righty against Israel Madrimov, or he comes out fighting righty against Jeff Horn, and he immediately switches southpaw within seconds or minutes of the first round, that just tells you that that's where he's comfortable at fighting. So he's not a guy that is Leonard Bundu or even a Jaron Ennis. Boots Ennis is a constant switcher. He's not one of those guys. He's one that's dominant in one position but fights very well in the other. Tyson Fury can switch southpaw, but he's better as a righty. Danny Jacobs can switch southpaw, but he's better as a righty. Crawford can switch righty, but he's better as a lefty. You know what I mean? Lefty and backhand. He's better at that. So when people say he can switch, will he be switching in this fight? Yeah, he might switch momentarily to give a different angle on a punch, but I don't think he's going to be standing there and fighting periods in the round and as a righty. I don't believe that. I don't think that's going to be a factor here. I think he's shown that he has versatility in other ways, but I don't think that is going to be the way that we're going to see in this fight here. I don't believe that at all. I think he's going to stay as a southpaw because that's his dominant stance, and I think that's the stance he need to be in this fight. Because I think he would give Canelo a little bit more issues. Offensively, he would give Canelo a little bit more issues. But defensively, it might not be great because we already know that straight right hand is Canelo's favorite punch. All right. Um, but yeah, overall, Crawford's IQ is at the top tier of the sport and all of the sport. And there's no denying that. You just, you know, it wasn't until this fight where I've even considered picking against Bud. I've always picked against for Bud, because I just felt like even some of these fights, like I was a little nervous about the Postal fight. I was a little bit nervous about there's a few fights there that was the Kavalaskas fight. I was even a little nervous about like Felix Diaz, you know what I mean? Like I thought Felix Diaz was a really good fighter, you know what I mean? There's fights here that I was kind of nervous about. I was nervous about Kell Brook. I saw how serious he was taking. I saw the condition, the weight, and how good he looked going into that fight. There's a lot of fights I was nervous about. All right, but this is on a different level, you know. So yeah, I mean, there's many things that Crawford could do, but we got to stick to what we know he can do, and I think that overall, before I get to Canelo, overall, I think when you watch his fights, I like to watch the Avanesha fight. I think that's a realistic fight to rewatch because Avanesha is coming in with a high guard. He's a righty. He's throwing overhand rights. He's throwing straight rights. He's looking to time and counter Crawford's jab, that lead hand. And he's also looking to punch with Crawford, time that hook. You know what I mean? Those are the things that I expect Canelo to do. Of course, Canelo does it at a higher level than David Avanesyan, and also Canelo hits a lot harder than David Avanesyan. But at the end of the day, I think there are some similarities there. So I think I rewatched that fight several times. I rewatched the Bivol fight simply because Bivol beat Canelo, and I think Crawford can do some of the things that Bivol can do. You know what I mean? With the movement, with the lead hand. I rewatched that fight. And the same with Felix Diaz. I think that's a fight that is similar style that I can see Crawford fighting like to win this fight. All right. But when it comes to Canelo, experience. Obviously, he has a side advantage. But experience. He's fought at these big stage fights so many times. So that could be a strength or it could be a weakness. Because maybe he's overlooking Crawford. I don't know. But I'm hoping he's not overlooking Crawford, because he shouldn't overlook Crawford. All right. This is his, in certain ways, he's been in there with Floyd. He's been in there with Triple G. He's made millions off pay-per-views. He's become undisputed. So he's had his own big moments. But I feel like this is a big moment for him because not only is he making a ton of money, the most money he's ever made, but this is a fight he must win. You don't want to go this far to lose to a guy that jumped up 2 divisions. When you beat all of the fighters you beat. You don't want to do that. You lost to Floyd Mayweather. People give you a pass for that. Why? Because you were young. He's 23 years old. You weren't as good as you are now. But you were still very good. The fight was definitely necessary. You had over 40 professional fights. But you've improved since that fight. We can see that you've improved. Right? But you going in there for Triple G. You've been in there with Lara. You've been in there with fighters that I thought would beat you. I thought Triple G was going to beat Canelo in the first fight. I predicted that. I predicted Lara to probably pull off the upset against Canelo back then. All right. And some may argue that he won both fights. I think he definitely lost the Triple G fight. The Lara fight was close. I edged it for Lara. But I don't think it was a robbery. But Canelo has been there, and he's been at this stage. And I would think that he's preparing for this fight to be, you know, a legacy fight for him. And from based on what he said in his most recent interviews since he's arrived over there in Vegas, it sounds like it. It sounds like his mentality, like, no, this is a big fight for me. Everything he's saying is a little different from what he was saying a little earlier on. All right, so which is good. He's looking at this fight to be a big fight. But overall, like Styles, I mean, again, he does a lot of these things that Crawford, I said he does. Maybe he does a switch. All right, but he's a master at what he does. Okay. He's very deceptive. It's very easy. I mean, it's very hard to really call what kind of punch Canelo is doing because the continuous feints, not on the Majimov level, but with the feints and the setup, that double jab right hand. Which right hand is he throwing? You can't always tell. Some of them are going to be blocked. Some of them are the highest level, they're going to be predicted by Crawford. Some of them are going to be blocked. But sometimes, is he throwing it straight to the head? Is he throwing it straight to the body? Is he looping it around the guard? Is it going to be an uppercut? So when you see the double jab and your back is against the ropes, which punch is Canelo going to throw? He's very good at disguising what kind of punch he's going to loop. And he has a phenomenal left hook. So even though Crawford has a great hook, do you want to go into a firefight with Canelo? I was thinking of Anthony Joshua and Daniel Dubois fight. The last punch. AJ had hurt him, backed him up. AJ tried to finish him off. I always thought AJ was never a good finisher. But AJ tried to finish him off. And the last punch he threw, his left hand was down. It was low. His guard was low. He threw the uppercut all the way from the waist. I mean, he threw the uppercut like he was Axel from Streets of Rage, bro. He threw it from the ground up. And all Triple D did was throw a short right hand with him, got to him quicker, knocked him out. And when I see Crawford with that uppercut at times, he takes risks. That what sets him differently from some of these other guys, like a Dmitry Bivol. Crawford takes risk. And sometimes when he's looking to counter his opponent that comes in with that uppercut, he likes to lead with that uppercut, he has to watch the left hook. He has to watch the left hook. Because Canelo's hook, you don't want to throw with him. You know what I mean? And that's what Crawford normally does. He takes those risks. And when he's been hit by guys like Avanesian and Majimov, when he's been hit by these guys don't hit like Canelo hit. Canelo puts you down. You know what I mean? Canelo he's a great counterpuncher. And he's a good inside game. And he loves leading to the body with that left hook. Now, it doesn't matter if you're moving. Ask Iris Landy Lara. Ask Dmitry Bivol. One thing that Canelo is going to continuously get off in his fights is that left hook to the body. Nonstop. He's always going to get that punch off. So whether you're stationary, whether you have to work the ropes, whether you're on the ropes or not, he's always going to get that left hook off. You know what I mean? And for a guy that's moving up 2 divisions and has to be somewhat mobile, it's going to be effective. You know what I mean? So I don't think Canelo has the amount of arsenal that Terence Crawford has. But I think Canelo is very good at the things that he do. He's perfected that. And I think that may be what it takes in order for him to win. I don't think he fights on a back foot as good as Crawford. You know what I mean? But does he have to in this fight? No, he's not fighting Triple G. He's fighting a guy that's moved up. Now, stamina has always been a problem with Canelo. Because the problem with Canelo, I think, is that he loads up too much. He loads up. He likes to throw single shots. Outside of the jab and a double jab and the right hand, He's normally throwing one punch at a time. So whether he's hooking or whatever he's throwing it with power. Not enough jabs. I believe the Bivol fight he'll do only like 13 jabs. Not enough jabs there. You know what I mean? But we'll see. Maybe he'll make a more of a use of his jabs, and stuff. Maybe he'll, attack the body a little bit more. But he loads up a lot. And by the time he gets to these later rounds, um, he's getting outperformed by some of these guys in the later rounds. Even Triple G, who's 40 years old, won the last few rounds against Canelo. You know, even guys like John Ryder, who's a southpaw. I watched that fight again. Um, Not much there between outside of them both being southpaws. There's not much there. I would probably go back to the Billy Joe Saunders fight if you're gonna watch a Canelo fight with a southpaw. I think he has a little bit more similarities, but this guy's just outworking him a little bit in the later rounds, even after being punished like Ryder. It just goes to show that Canelo, at some point in his career outside of the Triple G rematch, he's always had stamina issues. Now, defensively, Canelo is pretty damn good, but he's not the guy he was against Danny Jacobs. All right. Danny Jacobs' fight was a long time ago. All that nice, fancy head movement that we saw in that fight, that's gone. A lot of it has to do with him blocking with his hands, parrying, stuff like that. Not really the over fancy low guard head movement. That stuff is still there. He could do it a little bit, but not in that level. And that's one of the things that I say would have fallen off a little bit with Saul. Being at 168, moving that extra weight, I just think there's certain things at 160. I think he was faster. Same thing what I say about Bud. All right. So I think, when it comes to Canelo, uh, I think in order for him to win, I think what he should do is you fighting a smaller guy. I think you should take the approach you took against Jamel Charlo. Now, I understand it's not going to be as easy because Jamel just doesn't have the ability of Crawford. Jamel, outside of moving, he doesn't have the ability of Crawford. He just doesn't. It's a different fighter, different styles. Crawford does a lot more with his lead hand. It's going to be harder to get to him. All right. But I think he should take the same approach. Crawford is very often a slow starter, especially the first round, maybe two. I think Crawford, you need to jump on Crawford and let him know, like, you're moving up to my division. You want to be in control very early because your momentum early might change the mental of Crawford. You want to break him mentally, physically, but also mentally. Make Crawford feel like he doesn't belong in the division. So we don't want to see the Canelo that fought Skull. If there's any signs of what he looked like against Skull, Crawford easily wins this fight. But if he's what he was against Charlo, where he's cutting you off and he's continuously hitting you to the body and trap you in the corners, using that forearm and your lead hand to keep you in place while he attacks the body and hit you in the arms and shoulders. Those are the key things that will win Canelo this fight. I think he needs to be aggressive. I think he needs to hit Crawford to the body as much as possible because Canelo may fade, but if Crawford fades late, then it evens things out a little bit, especially because he's the one that's coming up and carrying the extra weight and he's not used to doing it. Not only that, but Canelo is more active. I didn't go through the whole resumes because I've done it already, but Crawford fights once a year. Canelo fights twice. Is self-preservation better by only taking a fight a year for Crawford? Or is activity better for Canelo, being that he stay active as they're both aging? Which will be better? I don't know. We'll see in this fight. Would Crawford be a little bit rusty? I think at the very least, Crawford is going to be rusty early. Okay. I don't think he's the best starter. He's not a bad starter. He started good against Spence after the first round, but I think Canelo needs to start the momentum halfway through the first round. Just push forward, and let Crawford know like what's up very early. Um, I think the best punch for Canelo is that right hand. That overhand right. Is it going to be an overhand right? Is it going to be a straight again? Is it going to loop? Is it going to be an uppercut? I think getting Crawford closer and closer to the ropes, it's what it's going to count, especially that Crawford likes to lean back straight sometimes. You want him there. You want him to be a target. You don't want to be him to be that hard to target. So, um, try to make it a firefight, and try to time Crawford when he tries to time you. I think for Canelo, if he keeps that going, and keeps his cardio intact, he should win. Um, I think Canelo has more ways to win. I was listening to Roy Jones the other day. He said something like there's 6 ways Crawford can win. And I mean, I don't really agree with that. I think Canelo has more ways to win. I think he's more likely to hurt Crawford. Um, I think his aggression and him coming forward could definitely make the judges pick him in his favor if it does go to points. I think he just has more ways to win. I think, either by hurting Crawford or just outworking him and just being the aggressor to the eyes of the viewers and the judges. I think he has more ways to win. I think it's Crawford that has to be more cautious. Crawford, and I think in my opinion, I think Crawford should definitely move, start off as a southpaw, stab to the body, stab to the body. That needs to happen all night long. Get this guy to slow down. You don't want it. You don't want the energy to be equal in the second half of the fight if you're Crawford. So to start out, take less risk early. I think he should make more risk later when Canelo has gassed a little bit. The early risk there, the big shots, the trading hooks and trying to counter or time Canelo with a big shot while you're exchanging is very ridiculously dumb in the earlier rounds. You want to get this guy to burn out a little bit. I think Crawford should focus on his jab and stabbing Crawford with that straight left to the body, hooking to the body, moving and spinning around him. I think that's what he needs to focus on. You know what I mean? He's going to get hit to the body as well. He's going to get hit, period. But I think moving in the earlier rounds and using that lead hand to keep Canelo away. All right, distract him with that lead hand, constantly tapping him, touching him with the touch his gloves, constantly doing that early. Let him burn down a little bit before you start really going in for the power shots, the real eye-catching shots. I think that's what Crawford should do in this fight. All right. Did all that talking. How far are we in now? 48 minutes. Told you guys this is probably going to be like an hour if I did it this way. um, I think Canelo. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. Since this fight was announced, I spent more time trying to convince myself that Crawford is going to win. So all of the film study that I've done in the last 7 months, rewatching fights over and over again, I'm looking in ways to say Crawford's going to win this fight. You guys know how I feel about Crawford. Crawford is my favorite active fighter. Um, and I really want him to win. I mean, the fact that for the people that says Crawford's knocking him out, I wish he would knock out Canelo. But at the end of the day, I can't let my emotions get into it. And if I'm going this hard and rewatching fights and I still feel the same way 7 months later, my first video on this was 7 months ago. And I said, I don't like the two-way jump. I don't like the two-way jump. Crawford at 38, trying this right now, it's just a little too much for me. Do I think he can win? Absolutely. You know, um, And I think it's the time. I like his chances now more than it if it were to happen before. But I have to be honest with myself. When I look at the two of them fight, I can see Canelo winning in many more ways, and that's just being honest. Do I want the guy to win? Absolutely. I have to be real. I think Canelo's gonna win this fight. I think he's gonna win. Um, I think it's gonna be a points decision win. I do think Crawford might catch a good shot, might get hurt, or might even take a knee. You know, if he does get hurt with a good shot, I'm hoping that he is responsible in that period and he just doesn't. If he does get knocked down, I hope he just doesn't jump back up. I hope he doesn't become one of those people that's embarrassed to get knocked down. I've seen Amir Khan do it. I see J Rock do it. I've seen a lot of fighters over the years. Anthony Joshua did it. Guys get real too quick. I think if Canelo does hurt Crawford, and he's actually legitimately hurt, I think it'll be wise to take a knee because you don't want to be hurt trying to fight back and trade with Canelo. Um, so I got Canelo winning this one. As far as betting, I am probably gonna likely do a live bet. I would like to see how Crawford looks taking a punch from Canelo. I like the chances. I mean, if anything changes, I'll let you guys know after the weigh-in. I'll definitely let you guys know when I'm going to put money on. But I like the idea of a live bet simply because I think how Crawford takes a punch from Canelo, uh, it determines, it lets me know a lot, you know. Punch for punch, activity wise, I think Crawford could be better. But Canelo, when he lands, it's just going to be more effective. You know what I mean? So this is why I got Canelo winning the fight, as much as this fight means to me. All right, and that's it. So anyway, that's my pick. Please, again, subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I know this was a really, really long breakdown, right? And I'm sorry, but I just didn't have the time to make 1,000 videos. I'm not going to be able to make much content within the next few days. So I will be here Saturday to cover the fight live. I'm probably going to be with my father. Probably going to be at his house. And we'll be here. Also, as soon as I find out anything with Naoya Inoue and MJ Akmandalia fight, if they are going to broadcast it, or if I find a way where I can see the fight, I will go live for that early Sunday morning as well. All right. Anyway, I'm out of here. Hope you guys enjoy. I'll see you guys soon. Peace.